Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken and welcome back to another video. If you remember a few months back, I started my series of Season 4 guides with the original Ultimate Advanced Grohk guide in Paladins, which was a comprehensive guide covering his different playstyles, gameplay tips, and loadouts. It was a fantastic guide, which I thought would be helpful for several months to come. Well, as it turns out, I was wrong, because Grohk got the buff of a lifetime in the most recent patch, the Shadows update. You see, the way Grohk's totems used to work was that their cooldowns would go down one by one, so once the first totem was off cooldown, then the second one would start its 10-second cooldown. With the most recent buff Grohk got, his totems got the ability to reduce their cooldowns simultaneously. So if you placed 3 totems back to back, you'd get all 3 totems again in about 10 seconds, instead of the 30 seconds it would take before this update. This is huge, and is an absolute game changer for Grohk's playstyles and builds. Totemic Ward went from his worst talent to his best talent overnight, and so I have to remake this guide. So, this is the updated version of the Grohk guide for Season 4, after the legendary buff of the Shadows update. This guide will contain many of the same gameplay tips and the same overview of his kit from the original guide, and the main focus of this video will be on updated builds and advice for his different playstyles. His healing builds have been shaken to their core, so make sure to stick around to see the new and improved way to play him as a healer. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get straight into the video. Alright, let's start off with an overview of his base kit. Grohk is a lightning orc, capable of channeling the power of lightning to heal his teammates and dish out damage. His primary fire is his lightning staff, which is a beam weapon that ramps up damage the longer it's connected to a target. When you first hit a target, it will deal 750 damage per second, and it will ramp up for about 2 seconds until it reaches its peak of 980 damage per second. This is incredibly high DPS for a support to have, and it makes Grohk a lethal enemy to fight. However, Grohk's lightning staff cannot hit headshots, and has considerable drop-off at range until 120 units away, where it will no longer connect with a target. This makes Grohk most effective at close to medium range. You can fire your lightning staff for 5 seconds before it needs to reload, and if you stop firing for half a second, it will start regenerating ammo. It will take an additional second to fully recharge. Alternatively, if you let the staff run completely out of ammo, it will go through a 3-second long reload animation. You never want to let it run completely out of ammo, but instead just wait the 1.5 seconds for it to fully recharge when it gets low. Even with deft hands, it's still best to let it recharge instead of reloading, so you should never buy deft hands with Grohk, under any circumstance. When using the talent Spirits to main, Grohk heals teammates he hits with his lightning staff for a flat 700 healing per second. Grohk's next ability is his Shock Pulse. This ability is an electric projectile that bounces between enemies 5 times after hitting the initial target, dealing 150 damage with each bounce. It doesn't apply Cauterize, and it will reveal enemies who are out of line of sight of Grohk to him for half a second. This will not reveal enemies to teammates, however. Shock Pulse will also bounce to deployables such as Luna, Ying's Illusions, and Barracks turrets, making this an especially effective ability when going against enemies with deployables. This ability also has an interesting effect on Grohk's overall DPS on a target. If Shock Pulse can bounce between the enemy Grohk is shooting at and another target, it will make his overall DPS higher. However, if he fires the Shock Pulse while shooting at an enemy and the pulse doesn't bounce to another target, his DPS on the enemy will be lower. This means Shock Pulse is best used against multiple enemies, and should not be used at all against just a single target with no nearby deployables or teammates. When he uses Maelstrom, his weapon shots will reduce the cooldown of Shock Pulse by half a second, and Shock Pulse will chain to 4 additional enemies. His next ability is his Healing Totem, which allows him to deploy a healing totem that heals all teammates within its radius for 300 healing a second. His totem has 2 charges, and its healing effects stack, meaning that if you place 2 totems near a teammate, they'll be healed for 600 healing per second. His totem has a placement range of 100 units, and will place 10 units behind where the crosshair is targeting. He can also place the totem against and behind walls, as well as on platforms above Grohk. In the original Grohk guide, I showed some clips of me and Hosphere demonstrating proper totem placement. Hosphere is a fellow Grohk enthusiast who has a level 200 Grohk, and he helped me out with the original guide, and thus this guide. I'll show those clips again, because they're still relevant after the buff.
You can also deploy things over walls, like this.
Yeah, you can deploy past the wall. So basically just look above the wall and then, boom, now it's behind the wall. Also, if you want to cancel placing a totem, then just look up and wait for the X and then, release. Easy.
Or you can just right-click as you have it up.
That also works, yeah.
Bruh. This is
Yeah,
so
if you place it
dumb.
on high ground, won't it still? Yeah, it'll still heal you, so
Yeah,
that's another thing you can do.
like, I think...
What is that?
Oh, yeah, you can do that.
What?
But that doesn't really help you because it's too far up. It heals you up.
Hey, if you have a Drogo's flying up there.
just throw it up and hey, Drogos, have some of that.
There you go, check my healing. What the heck? But yeah, like here. Here is good enough.
Yeah, you can get healed from there.
Grohk's totem placement takes some getting used to, but mastering it will help you improve at healing allies no matter where they are. Grohk's totems have 1,250 health, and are affected by Bulldozer, so you need to be careful to place them where they'll heal your teammates but can't be destroyed, such as behind walls or to the side of where the main source of damage is coming from. They last for 6 seconds or until destroyed. After the major buff Grohk got, you can also feel free to stack multiple totems on a target much more liberally than before, and you also don't need to be as careful to keep them from getting destroyed, because you can spam them much more frequently now. Grohk's totems will also heal teammates below them within a certain range, so placing totems on the high ground can also be a viable option. Let's head back to Brightmarsh for some more examples of proper totem placement. What are we doing?
Okay. Showing good and bad example of totem placement.
Alright,
So,
here's a great example of what not to do. Let's just, oh. Look, it's behind you!
Oh!
That's a great totem position! Yeah.
Yeah!
Yeah, so you want to be careful when placing the totems, you know, kind of. You can see sort of where it's going to go if you just hold down the ability. So, place it there. That would be still kind of bad, because your tank's going to be like here. Like somewhere like here. Well, yeah, if they're standing on this part of the objective, then yeah. Maybe a little bit closer, depending on, like, how much they're spamming.
Yeah.
Or, alternatively... There we go. Sort of out of sight, out of the way. You know, we're fighting on point. Not really focusing on the totem. There we go.
Like preferably you want to try to place it at a wall and where they can't really hit it.
Yeah, you want to make it hard to hit. Like there. Like, sort of hard to hit. Like, if the enemies are here, shooting here, and there's a totem there, I'm going to prioritize shooting this way, and the totem's going to be out of the way. Or, you know, just completely do this thing. Completely behind the wall, but I'm still getting healed here. So if your teammates are, like, chilling in this area... I guess a better demonstration that's sort of not on the point would be, like, over here. Say there's an Androxus shooting, you know, around about over there. Place the totem there, your teammate's here, getting healed, and they can easily kill the Androxus. Nice and easy. Or like here. I'm fighting someone, they're over here, place the totem there. Nice. Whereas if I place the totem here, they can blow that up. No problem. In general, just put it behind walls. Try not to get your totems shot. And they don't really work for body blocking the same as the illusions do. Like, you can't block a Drogo's ult with them, for example. Which would be silly. It'd be very silly. So yeah, you want to protect them best you can. Like this. Not like... put it in the center point. Unless you got, like, shields or something on point. Like, if there's a half-shell Makoa there, then go wild. Go ahead. Lastly, Grohk's totems can, in fact, be placed on the payload. However, they won't stick to the payload and move with it like other deployables do. Instead, if the payload moves away from the totem, it will simply float in midair. How? I don't know. I think it's better not to ask. Grohk's healing totems can be augmented by the talent Totemic Ward, which increases the healing per second of each totem to 390 and grants Grohk 3 charges of his totems instead of 2, so he can spread the healing out even farther. This talent is amazing after the buff, and is by far the best option Grohk has for healing tanks and other targets who are not particularly mobile. One of Grohk's most important abilities is his Ghost Walk, which is his movement ability and a helpful way to evade damage. Ghost Walk allows Grohk to walk around for a brief period while in a ghost form, meaning any debuffs such as Cauterize are cleansed, and he can walk through enemies and any source of damage, from bullets to arrows to bombs. It lasts for 2 seconds, and increases his movement speed by 50%. You can also cancel it early if you so choose. This is an extremely powerful ability for evading damage and healing up quickly in the heat of combat, but it has an incredibly lengthy cooldown of 15 seconds, so you have to be careful not to waste it. Grohk can also be healed during Ghost Walk even while walking through Dead Zone, so if you need some quick healing, you can place down a totem at any moment and Ghost Walk to heal yourself back up. When timed properly, Ghost Walk can make Grohk incredibly hard to kill. Lastly, Grohk's ultimate is Tempest, which is honestly one of the coolest ultimates in the game. Tempest has a little bit of everything. It grants Grohk crowd control immunity and flight, and it gives him and 3 allies 700 healing per second and 50% increased movement speed. It also slows 3 nearby enemies by 60% and deals 400 damage per second to them. This makes Grohk's ult one of the best ultimates for bringing his team back to the objective or payload and pushing through choke points, and it can turn the tide of a fight. It also doesn't cast until 3/4 of a second after activation, and will not use the ultimate charge until that 3/4 of a second has passed. Grohk's ultimate will also target invisible enemies with its damage, making it a great way to kill invisible enemies such as Strix, Skye, or Shalin without needing to buy Illuminate or wait for one of your teammates to assist you. His ultimate also charges incredibly quickly as a side effect of using Maelstrom and hitting shock pulses continuously, and you absolutely want to buy morale boost for this amazing ultimate. However, one thing to note after the Shadows update is that Grohk's ultimate no longer charges as quickly as it did before due to damage dealt by his lightning staff and shock pulses, but it still charges decently fast with some morale boost. Alright, now let's talk about Grohk's different playstyles and loadouts. This is the part of the video where we'll really be getting into the changes and new tips that have been brought about as a result of the massive changes that Grohk has received this update. So, let's get into it. First off, let's talk about Totemic Ward, which went from his worst talent to his best talent overnight. Because of the change to his totem cooldowns which causes them to reduce their cooldowns simultaneously, Totemic Ward became a juggernaut of healing output. With a decent level of Chronos, Grohk can keep pretty much 100% uptime on all 3 of his totems as long as they don't get destroyed. The combined healing output of his 3 totems is around 1170 healing per second, which is really, really good. You can spread out these 3 totems to heal teammates for 390 healing per second over a massive area, or you can stack all 3 totems on top of each other to heal teammates for 1170 healing per second almost constantly. This makes Totemic Ward the best talent for healing beefy teams with tanks and low mobility champions like Tyra, for obvious reasons. This amount of healing in a decently sized radius is insane, and with the right build, it can be improved even further. Now, before I show you my Totemic Ward build, I want to talk for a quick second about the card Gale. Gale used to be a mandatory card to have in any of Grohk's healing builds because it reduces the cooldown of a totem by 3 seconds. However, now that his totem cooldowns tick down simultaneously, this card isn't necessary to maintain good uptime on your totems. On top of that, Gale did not get changed to affect all of your totems. It still only affects 1. So, as of this patch, Gale is pretty much useless. Instead, there is a far better option for a Totemic Ward build, or just any healing build in general, and that is Crackle. Crackle increases the duration of your totems by an extra second, making them last 7 seconds instead of 6 seconds. His totems also have a cooldown of 10 seconds, which gets diminished to 7 seconds if you get Chronos 3. So, if you get Chronos 3 and use Crackle, you can have truly 100% uptime on Grohk's totems. As long as you're alive and your totems don't get destroyed, you can give your team consistent zones of healing, ranging from the minimum of 390 healing per second to the maximum focused healing of 1170 healing per second. This is absolutely ridiculous, especially for comps featuring multiple tanks. For the foreseeable future, comps with 2 or even 3 tanks with Grohk and a heavy DPS like Tyra will be genuinely viable thanks to this totem cooldown buff combined with Totemic Ward. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if his totem build somehow gets nerfed by next patch. As of writing this, after the Shadow update was released, he actually already got nerfed to compensate for this buff. His speed card, Spirit's Grace, got nerfed to just 30% at level 5, and it no longer stacks. Of course, this card is absolutely still viable to run, since it gives you and your teammates some fantastic movement speed. But if you were running it at a lower level in your builds before, you'll probably want to make it a few levels higher. But as far as nerfs to his actual totems is concerned, the way I hope and predict that they'll nerf this is to increase the cooldown of his totems, so that he can no longer have the true 100% uptime on his totems. If I were in charge, I would increase the totem cooldown to anywhere between 12 and 15 seconds, which would still make Totemic Ward viable, but not the spam fest that it is right now. If he gets nerfed this way, then the builds in this guide will still be relevant, because Chronos and Crackle will still give you some very solid uptime on his totems. Anyways, as far as gameplay tips for Totemic Ward are concerned, you want to try and stick with your tank or tanks, and support them as best you can. After the buff, Grohk is the best support in the game for healing tanks, since he can give them some great healing on the point, increase movement speed, and also shoot at anyone who comes near to try and kill them. While you can afford to be a bit more aggressive than other supports like Ceres or Genos, since you can use your totems to help you stay alive, you're still not a tank, and you should still play near natural cover if you can. You also don't want to be caught away from your totems, because that's when you're weakest. Also, when you're near the point with your tanks, you should try not to get too focused on your tanks that you forget to give totems to your other teammates. Keeping 2 totems on the point, and then giving a totem here and there to your other teammates, is a good way to keep everyone topped off. And if your tanks aren't in much danger but your other teammates are, stacking 2 or 3 totems on someone can be enough to save their life. You should also keep in mind that totems can heal through thin walls. If you see a teammate who is just behind a wall and you place a totem up against that wall, you still have a chance to heal them, especially if they take notice of your totem and move towards it. Obviously, having line of sight with your teammates is ideal, but if you don't, there's still an opportunity to heal them if you need. Another effective healing tip with Totemic Ward is to place all 3 totems on point or another area where your team is taking heavy fire, and then ult on top of them for some truly monstrous healing output. The healing output of 3 totems plus your ult is around 1870 healing per second, which is absolutely insane, and you can also benefit from the full amount of this healing by flying low to the ground near your totems. This isn't always necessary if you're not taking too much fire, but if you're in danger of dying to a Kinessa or someone else, then flying low near your totems can be a great way to stay alive while healing your team for truly insane amounts of healing. Of course, this works great with any Grohk build, but it's most effective with Totemic Ward because you have more totems and they're more powerful. Also, since you should be running the speed card with Totemic Ward, and you no longer need to worry about frugally using totems, you can place 3 totems in a line all connecting each other to rush you and your allies to the objective, granting them decent healing and some movement speed which will help push them into the enemies. You can also use this tactic to chase an enemy if you need to, placing new totems as you're running out of your existing totems to keep up the speed buff and catch up to whoever you're chasing. While you could do this before the buff, it was a serious waste of totems, since you'd have to wait potentially 30 seconds to get all your totems back up again. But now that you can spam them, this is a viable strategy to use. As far as items are concerned when it comes to Totemic Ward healer Grohk, Chronos is key, as it is with just about any other healer. When you have Chronos 3 in combination with Crackle, you can have 100% uptime on your totems, so you should definitely try to max this item out as quickly as possible. Morale boost is also really good on Grohk, since his ultimate is just so powerful. Other than that, items with Grohk are just personal preference. You should also keep in mind that Rejuvenate will not increase the amount of healing you get from your own totems, so you should not buy that item when playing Grohk. Also, never buy Deft Hands on Grohk. It's just not worth it since reloading with Grohk is slower than letting his staff recharge when you get to low ammo. Lastly, I want to say that you should be trying to deal as much damage as possible while healing your team with totems. Unlike his Spirit's Domain build, you're free to make the most of Grohk's high DPS, since you're not forced to shoot your teammates. This allows Grohk to be a fantastic hybrid, putting out insane healing per second while also dishing out good damage too. Speaking of damage, Totemic Ward is still viable as a damage talent, just like it was before the update. If you want, you can bring out Grohk's infamous tank build, which you can use to solo tank if need be, or just duel other champions and overwhelm them with your indomitable self-sustain. I've actually updated my tank build since the last Grohk guide to better suit the changes to his totem cooldowns. My tank build used to have Phantom in it, to provide a bit of healing during Ghost Walk to make up for the fact that he couldn't really spam his totems that much. Now that he can have almost constant uptime on all 3 totems, this card is pretty much irrelevant for this build. I still have the shield card in there to keep me alive if I get low, but I've instead replaced Phantom with Monolith Totem. When testing this build, I actually found that people tried to get Bulldozer and shoot my totems to stop me from tanking, and it actually worked for a bit and forced me to change how I played. Monolith Totem will make his totems a bit more resilient to attempts to destroy them, and will also keep them alive in case you're fighting someone like Fernando, who can damage your totems just by attempting to fire at you. Now, as far as items are concerned when you're tanking with Grohk, Chronos is still pretty good for increased uptime on your totems and Ghost Walk. On top of Chronos, you should also prioritize defensive items like Haven and Resilience so you can be tougher to kill. However, if you're using this build as a duelist damage build, and you're just playing as a damage champion instead, Cauterize is of course your biggest priority unless the enemy team has no healing at all. Anyways, let's move on to his next healing playstyle, Spirit's Domain. This used to be the meta way to play Grohk as a healer, but it's since been outshined by Totemic Ward, since Totemic Ward allows you to be a competent healer while also getting the most out of Grohk's superb DPS. However, Spirit's Domain still has a place in Grohk's builds, as the superior method for healing flanks and flying champions. You see, while Totemic Ward is the new juggernaut for healing output when it comes to healing tanks and champions with low mobility, totems are still a really bad option for healing someone like Drogoz or Maeve, which are both champions who don't tend to stay in one place and often fly higher than the range of Grohk's juicy totems. So, Spirit's Domain is still a good option for healing them, since you don't force them to touch the ground or stay in one place in order to get healed. So, like with the last Grohk guide, I'll be showing two different builds. One for maximizing your healing output with Electrostatic and Thunderlord at high levels, and one that sacrifices some healing output for speed on Grohk's totems. Like with the Totemic Ward build, we've replaced Gale with Crackle, since the totem cooldown change no longer requires Gale to spam out totems, and Crackle lets him keep 100% uptime on his totems with Chronos 3. In the maximum healing output build, you may notice that I've dropped Spirit's Grace completely. Since the nerf, I feel that it's no longer helpful to run this card at level 3 or lower, and running it at level 4 or 5 takes away a lot of the potency of Thunderlord and Electrostatic, which you need to boost your healing output. So I've simply decided to remove it completely. So if you have champions on your team like Drogoz and Yaggoroth who can't really benefit from the movement speed your totems could give them, either because they can't move or don't stay in the totems, then this build can work just fine for those situations. Now, as far as playing Spirit's Domain goes, it's actually not much different from how it worked before the Shadows update. You want to focus your totems primarily on the tanks or less mobile targets, and then use your staff to either concentrate even more healing onto a teammate, or top off people who don't need a full totem. However, since his totems have become much more spammy with the recent change to their cooldowns, you don't really need to be as worried about wasting a totem on someone. If you can place them in a way that won't get them destroyed, that will absolutely help too. Now, while Grohk still isn't necessarily the best healer to choose when you need to heal a team with a bunch of nimble champions, if you are forced into such a situation, Spirit's Domain is still the build to go. However, I want to reiterate again that Grohk is the premier healer for tank-heavy comps with Totemic Ward. If you want to play healer Grohk, try and play him in a situation with multiple tanks, and use Totemic Ward, since it's fantastic for healing tanks and will also let you do damage. However, if you can't do such a thing, and you just want to play Grohk and wind up with Drogoz, Eevee, Maeve, or other champions that don't really like staying in totems, Spirit's Domain is still a fantastic option, albeit at the cost of not really doing as much damage as you could otherwise. Lastly, let's talk about items for Spirit's Domain. Like I've said multiple times throughout this guide, Deft Hands is not good on Grohk. You might think to buy it with Spirit's Domain, but you shouldn't. Simply letting his staff recharge when you're low on ammo is far quicker than draining your staff and letting it reload. Deft Hands will get your reload closer to this quicker recharge time, but it's still not worth it given that you're wasting precious credits and an item slot on Deft Hands instead of something else. Instead, you should prioritize Chronos and Morale Boost, as with the Totemic Ward build. Finally, let's move on to Maelstrom. Maelstrom is the talent that got affected the least by his totem changes, especially when it comes to loadouts. However, I'll still be covering it in this guide, since it's still a really good, effective way to play Grohk. Maelstrom is best used against teams with multiple tanks who will be grouped up, and teams with multiple deployables that his shock pulses can also bounce off of. However, against teams that aren't going to be grouped up, or teams where you'll often be dueling flanks and other damaged champions, I would still advise going for the Totemic Ward tank build to do your damage that way instead. Also, I should reiterate that you should not be going for Maelstrom or Totemic Ward damage builds if you're the solo healer on your team. You should only be going for a damage build if you have another healer on your team who can keep the team healthy and alive. Now, my Maelstrom build pretty much has not changed since the last guide. I still have Spirit's Grace at a high level, with Lightning Rod for ridiculous self-sustain, Arc Lightning at level 3 for a bit of extra range on shock pulses, and Thunderstruck to keep my ammo topped off as my shock pulses are bouncing around. Lightning Rod is a fantastic card to have in your Maelstrom build, because as your shock pulses are bouncing around, you're getting fantastic healing per second on top of your totems. And, with the buffed totem cooldowns, you can spam your totems much more frequently, making the totem plus lightning rod combo even more powerful. Also, while Arc Lightning is definitely helpful in a Maelstrom build, you don't necessarily need it at max level because his other cards are just more impactful. Still, it's nice to have a bit of extra range on his bounces. You also don't need Thunderstruck at any higher than level 2, because level 2 is enough to keep your ammo perfectly topped off as long as your shock pulse is consistently bouncing between enemies. With Maelstrom, you primarily want to use your totems on yourself while you're fighting an enemy to give you the edge over them in sustain, and also dodge around faster in conjunction with the Spirit's Grace card. In a group fight, you'll want to constantly be pumping out shock pulses, ideally aiming them at the playables for a guaranteed connection and bounce throughout the enemy team. You actually don't want to shoot the playables at all with your lightning staff, instead leaving them alive so you can farm up damage with your shock pulses on the enemy team. In a 1v1 situation with someone who doesn't have deplayables, you don't actually want to use the shock pulse at all due to the way Grohk's primary fire works. You see, shock pulse interrupts the ramping up of his lightning rod long enough to reset his DPS down to 750. This is negligible in a large group fight because the bouncing of your shock pulse is a net gain in DPS, but in a 1v1 where your shock pulse can't bounce between enemies and deplayables, you'll actually end up killing the enemies slower than if you didn't fire the shock pulse at all, if you can even manage to kill them before they kill you. In a 1v1, it's better to just focus an enemy down with your powerful lightning rod with the fully ramped up damage. This is actually why Maelstrom isn't as good into team comps that won't be grouped up as much, such as those with multiple flanks, because you won't be in many situations where you'll get higher DPS by firing your shock pulse. Against group up teams with multiple tanks and deplayables, however, you'll most likely always have the highest amount of damage in the lobby from all those bounces. This will also give you incredible sustain with a lightning rod card, which makes you nearly unkillable in the early stages of the game. In the later stages when the enemies have lots of cauterize, you can use your Ghost Walk after initiating a successful bounce to reap all the sweet benefits of that lightning rod healing uncauterized. Anyways, as far as items are concerned for Maelstrom Grohk, cauterize is key. Even though your shock pulses don't apply cauterize, your lightning staff does, and it will help you out when fighting pretty much anybody. Grohk's damage output, while strong, still gets out-healed by some healers such as Aya without substantial cauterize, so you should definitely buy cauterize on Grohk. Also, because Grohk's ultimate charge rate from doing damage got nerfed, morale boost got affected in an interesting way. Because you're getting less ultimate charge from doing damage, morale boost is technically less effective, but I don't think that should stop you from picking up morale boost on Grohk because his ultimate is just too good. And because his ult charge got nerfed in the first place, morale boost will make it easier to spam out ults as a result of this change. As far as other items go on Maelstrom Grohk, it again falls back to personal preference. I shall reiterate one last time for the people in the back. Do not buy deft hands on Grohk. But anyways, that's going to be the end of this video. Hopefully this extensive guide on Grohk helped you out in some way, and if it did, be sure to drop a like on the video and subscribe for more content like this from me. Also, consider joining the Discord server linked in the description to pick up tips and become part of our active community. I also stream regularly on Twitch, so you should go follow me there if you would like to see me stream Paladins and occasionally some other games. Also, I want to give a huge shout out to the members of this channel for helping to support what I do. If you want to become a member of the channel today to unlock some cool new emojis and an exclusive role in the Discord server, then just click the join button right next to the subscribe button. It's cheap and it helps support the channel. Anyways, I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.